have had the opportunity of knowing some of them in the past and some new friends. So maybe, Bijoy, if you could just go a little bit. Yeah, I think I'll be able to. So thank you so much for joining us, and I'm super delighted to have this wonderful panelist today. I did another panel this morning, and I was saying that how a dream come true for a consultant is to actually ask questions, because normally you are on the other side being asked harder questions. So today I have the privilege of asking difficult questions. But more important than that, I think what we heard from day one from the Prime Minister is saying what the vision and what we could do, and what we also heard from the other business leaders saying what they are kind of making it happen. None of this actually happens unless this group comes together. So I would say that this is the group of people who actually make the magic happen, and therefore I'm very excited to talk to all of you today to understand how do you make the magic happen and how do we make the magic get better over time. One other thing which comes to my mind when I look at where the world is going in the 5G connected ecosystem for the next decade is it is definitely not going to be what we have seen so far. Many of us tried to predict, and in fact I remember in about 120 years ago, an attorney at the patent office in the US said that anything which could be invented has actually been invented. That was about 120 years ago. And I'm sure how untrue that statement has been, because every single day we are inventing new things. It is not going to get stopped, and without taking much time on what we are going to do with respect to the 5G and its ability to change the world for us, let me first turn to Randeep, my dear friend, in terms of getting one very specific perspective. I want to hear from Randeep. You run a very large network and you possibly make a lot of things happen. Is from transition from 4G to 5G, everybody seems to say that yes, higher speed. But tell us, what is transition from 4G to 5G, what it means to businesses, to communities beyond speed, and if I were to kind of give a rider to that question, make it try, if you can explain it to a fifth grader, how would it look like? Although all of us here are highly educated, but I'm just talking about my intellect level.
So good afternoon to you all. I think 5G, we have seen transitions within this industry from 2G to 3G to 3G to 4G and 4G to 5G. 5G is the first time when the technology is built for industry. Fifth grader would be, I'll try to dabble between a fifth grader and try to simplify this thing as well. Yes, first thing is 5G comes with a higher spectrum, hence the speeds are faster, and it also comes up with some work on the latency side where the latency is lower. Well, a common user will be able to enjoy faster speeds, but what does faster speed do for me? I think there are some use cases we were talking just now. I mean, I'll share the same thing here. When 4G came, before 4G came, we used to listen to songs if we went on a drive, on a thumb drive, put it in a car and go and listen to the songs which were there in that thumb drive. If we wanted to listen to another song, it was not possible unless it was coming on a radio. But moment we have gone into the newer music apps and you have ubiquitous 4G coverage everywhere, you don't have the need of actually needing to carry any music. You can listen to millions and billions of songs, whichever you want to, and that is where the 4G has unlimited. Same thing happened on a video. You have a video subscription platform. You can watch any movie, any TV series you want to go. You don't need to have the hard storage. So what will 5G do for it? So one use case which is very popular, I mean, I didn't know it was so popular, is cloud gaming. Because gaming, you could only play on your PS4 or Xbox what console you had, what game you had. If you did not have the game, you cannot play. And the game used to be very expensive, so you have to really put your money where you want to put your money. I want to play that game. But with cloud gaming, and it is being demonstrated in our booth, I mean, it's really fabulous experience. Imagine it will become the same way, the way song has become, the way movie has become. You can go ahead, check out the game and want to play. It will be like subscription, so you don't need to own, you can just play anything. So that's one thing which will happen on a common user's place. So to a fifth grader, he can play any game he wants to play, because even the fifth graders play Xbox nowadays or PS4. They can play any game on the go, whatever they want to, so it's great. Another thing which will change is the entertainment or the immersive media. which could be about how we enjoy. We Indians are crazy about cricket. So we watch our IPL matches or nowadays T20 series on 2D screen. Imagine we all want to go to a stadium, but if we can't go if it is not in our state, and even in our city, if it is there, we cannot go if we can't buy the ticket or we don't like the crowd. So it is possible very soon if you have an immersive Oculus, you could be there in the game as if you are there in the audience. Imagine the experience will change. This is possible. I'm not saying 5G is making it possible. It is a tech which is making it possible. If you are in your home, probably FTTH, fiber on home can make it this thing. But if you are on the go, 5G will make it happen. But let's come to the main thing that 5G is built for industries. Why industries? Because industries need to really improve their efficiency, find out new use cases, and we go around this booth, amazing number of use cases which has been displayed. The imagination knows no bound. So in my view, 5G should not be seen alone. 5G should be seen in a way of 4 pillars. The first pillar is connected to itself, which is fiber or 5G or Wi-Fi in some case, but 5G solves some problems which Wi-Fi cannot or fiber cannot. I mean, it's a fixed place versus mobile, things like that. The second pillar in my mind is cloud. Why? Because you need to store the data close to you. You can't store the data on the same location. That changes the whole dynamic. So I think second is cloud. The third is IoT. Where is this data coming from? From sensors. I mean, we are displaying, and I think the agriculture use case where you'll put sensors in the soil, and the sensor will tell you what is the moisture, what is the content needed. We are agri economy. If you can put these sensors across, and you can do anything which that sensors tells you to improve the productivity of the crop, it will be amazing. We are agri economy. If 10% increase in productivity of our crops, see what it will do to the Indian economy. The last part is you have connectivity, you have sensor, you have cloud, then comes analytics. We loosely call it machine learning, AI, cognitive, whatever you call it. I call it analytics. All this data in the cloud, if you process, the findings it will give you is amazing. We use that already to fix our networks, but it can be done for use cases, face recognition, motion recognition, safety, security, So I would say 5G is a thought provoker into starting a revolution. You don't need to have 5G in every use case, but one of these 4 will definitely be relevant if you're going on that.
Fascinating. I'm not even going to try and summarize because you covered many topics, but that's very fascinating. So all that which I hear from you is very optimistic, and I think the world will change. Of course, as you said, the speed is one, but there are many use cases which get built on it. Every industry, right from a 5th grader playing cloud game versus and farmer trying to do anything. On the game one, by the way, I have a very interesting data point to share. If you actually looked at the hardware sales industry, the gaming hardware actually saw a slump after a big hit. And I was thinking that it's because Airtel is putting all the cloud games in there. But the further analysis also tells me that the crash of cryptocurrencies actually bring down the hardware sale for gaming devices, because the gaming devices were actually being used not just to play games, but also mine bitcoins and all of those things. So I think in this truly connected world. So let me just turn to you, Brian. You've been the one who's been driving innovation on its edge, working for Meta, and thank you for traveling all the way from Singapore here. Tell us, one, how do you see Metaverse as journey? Because Randeep also talked about the immersive experiences. While it's not just 5G, but immersive experience overall is a great thing. So tell us about what you're seeing on Metaverse, where it is headed, and more importantly, what are the other possibilities around that ecosystem?
Thank you. Okay, I think I'm on. So, I have a story about this cloud gaming. So my 5th grader gave me a bill shock because I left my credit card details on it, and then when I went, the bill came, and he had bought quite a few game titles. So check your credit card. But on the metaverse, at the root, what the metaverse is trying to do is to take the mobile internet experience that we have today, make it more immersive, make it more interactive, and make it more immediate in a 3D environment. And so what we see, an ecosystem by itself that comprises of devices. This could be VR devices, AR devices, XR devices, content providers, platforms, and certainly very important is the connectivity part. And that's why we're here and very excited to see 5G launch in India, because we believe that 5G will be a foundational piece, together with FTTX and Wi-Fi, like Randeep said, to bring the metaverse to life. Effectively, what the metaverse does is to give you an ability to be almost physically in a place when you can't be physically there. Now, don't get us wrong. We are not saying that replace these physical activities. Nothing beats us meeting like this and having interactions. But if you cannot be there, you cannot buy the ticket, you cannot fly, the metaverse is the closest replacement you can get to a physical, being physically there with your family, with your friends. And whether that's for games, for healthcare, for consumers, what we've seen in the pandemic is that VR games has picked up in the last 2 years. But the other segment that's surprising is healthcare. Not healthcare, sorry, but exercise. VR exercise is really hot. And then you translate that to enterprise, we are starting to see very interesting use cases. So for instance, healthcare. In a VR world, it seems that you can prevent or retard dementia because you stimulate the mind of the patient. You can also put medical health professionals into high-stress environment so that they train to make the right decisions. So we have one example, which is pediatric surgery. Now, pediatric instance is low, and that's a good thing because you don't want babies to be sick. But that poses a different problem because the doctors don't get practice. If the incidence is too low, doctors don't get practice. So how do you practice the doctor when a child is being wheeled in ER? Parents are panicking. How do you simulate the environment? So VR is a means of doing that. So we're seeing some really interesting use case for healthcare. We're seeing interesting use case also for manufacturing. Manufacturing plants run 24/7, and when you take down that plant for maintenance, you want to make sure you get it right and do the maintenance and bring it back as soon as possible. Again, VR provides this almost real-time training and simulation that helps there. So taken together both on the consumer side as well as the enterprise side, we believe this over 10 years will open up new avenues and new revenue opportunities. I mean, if all of us sat here in 2005 and said there will be ride hailing and cloud gaming, I don't think we could have fathomed at that point in time. And so we believe that Metaverse will take us on this same journey, and networks will play a critical role, and we're thrilled to work with service providers to get networks ready for the Metaverse.
Thank you, Brian, for those wonderful comments on the bill shock. Again, I would like to say again, Airtel doesn't pay me for saying that, but since you guys have introduced the bill shock on international roaming, it's made my life very good. So I think we need bill shock preventions everywhere in all kinds of industries. So maybe I hope the credit card industry is listening too. Okay, one thing which I kind of reflected on to say, okay, hey, the metaverse is not just about the fun stuff or the gaming stuff and all that. Is real enterprise use cases. And I really like the example of you're saying, can you simulate panic? For that, you can actually enter some of my client's boardroom, so you don't need a metaverse for that. But yes, simulating panic in a real world, saving the child situation can be fascinating. Let me turn to Gautam, because while I keep hearing a whole lot about saying the art of possible, we are pushing the boundary and all of that, but do you see, Gautam, a risk of we creating a world which is a lot more exclusive? And because with the increasing cost of devices, affordability is a challenge. So while we continue to rush, are we rushing so fast that we are leaving some components of society behind? And how do you see the ecosystem can play a role of making it affordable and accessible to all?
Thanks, Akhilesh. Again, just to answer your question, let me take... Am I audible? Yeah. Okay. So just to answer that question around the ecosystem and the affordability, let me take two different perspectives. Let me start with where are we on this journey of digital transformation. So we've actually seen multiple phases of this journey, and I would say phase 1.0 was all about connectivity and coverage. We've gone through that phase. The second phase was all around data and cloud. We've seen how that's changed our lives. And I believe the third phase, which we call phase 3.0, is really all about us thinking of the network as becoming a platform. It's basically a foundation on which the entire digital ecosystem or the economy is being built. Now, we've heard in this IMC itself many people talking about the size of that, and it's about $1 trillion by 2025 that's being talked about. So that's the scale of things. Now, if I look at the technology perspective of it, now I do believe networks are extremely important for us to get there, and of course networks need to be efficient, cost effective, so on and so forth. But there's one important aspect to the network, and there's an unsaid rule about how networks are operated, right? And the unsaid rule for the engineering and operation folks in the room, you would relate to this. The unsaid rule is, if you built a network and it's running, don't touch it. But as we move forward, I believe we'll have to actually get away from this rule, because this phase 3.0 is going to drive us to evolve this network continuously, grow it in terms of capacity, scale, reliability. So at Sienna, we are going to be driving the envelope of innovation and technology to keep scaling up the network, to keep driving more efficiencies out of it, and just lower the cost per bit and the affordability piece of it. Now that brings me to my next thing around how this ecosystem and business is going to get structured. Now, the first thing that we see, what's happening around the business aspect of this is, the number of players in this ecosystem is drastically increasing. Now, we see service providers, we see hyperscalers, we see system integrators, we see OEMs, startups. So the number of stakeholders is increasing, and also the demarcation of how these stakeholders play with each other and what's the scope of each stakeholder is changing quite a lot. So we'll see in the next or in the coming months and years, this scope is going to get redefined with new business cases. And the important piece here is, when we define these new business cases, we got to be mindful of the flow of money. And why I say that is because we've seen that the flow of money can be very different. It can be very different from the flow of data, which means, what I mean by that is, data could be flowing through some stakeholders in this ecosystem, while the flow of money could be through a completely separate channel. And that's something that we need to, as an industry, try and solve. So if you're able to take care of two things, first is the affordability on the consumer side, whether it's B2B or B2C. India is a cost-sensitive market, and if we don't get the affordability right, I believe there's no business. And the second is how we actually make this flow of money or balance of money more equitable and fair, so that all stakeholders can actually run a profitable business and it's sustainable long term. So if we are able to actually take care of those two aspects, I do believe that this next decade that's coming does have a bright digital future for us.
That's fascinating. I think you made a very subtle point on who's providing and who's making money. I will leave that question for the others' interest, if there is any, because I think it's a very interesting topic to debate, but we'll come to that. Let me turn to Bijoy, and thank you, Bijoy, for traveling all the way again from Dallas. So it's truly looking like a global panel to me already. We've been hearing about so much of innovation which is happening in some of these areas which we talked about. At one level, we want maximum value for money, and in the process, we may end up doing certain trade-offs. So give us your perspective on how you're seeing the innovation really driving growth without having to compromise experience and yet remaining affordable. Any thoughts on that?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I think we talked earlier about the journey from 3G to 4G, which provided a great smartphone experience for humans. But when we look at 5G, as was reiterated by the panelist, it's all about industry and different use cases. And if we're trying to build against such a network, few key things, at least in our view, needs to be accounted for. The first is, if you're going to be mining data to leverage that for analytics, you need an open disaggregated network, because you're not stifled by innovation of one vendor or a closed system. So it's very important that you could leverage the ecosystem for innovation to drive new features, get better performance out of your system, and that's where Open RAN comes in. Secondly, you have standalone networks, which today globally, there's not a lot of carriers who've deployed standalone networks, but it comes natively with features such as network slicing. And it's important because this has the potential to disrupt a lot of industries because it comes with features like slice assurance. And when you're trying to segment the network to support a device, a use case, or a person for that matter, that kind of capability needs to be natively available in the network. Thirdly, I would say with distributed networks and edge computing, there'd be a lot more use cases you could cater to for consumers or for enterprise. We talked about cloud gaming. Content streaming is another use case, very much applicable for consumer. Enterprise will have a lot more use cases as well. And with 5G actually leveraging the benefits of cloud and edge computing with industrial automation, it's kind of like a perfect fit. And then we mentioned cloud earlier, and when I talk about cloud, it's also about any cloud strategy or a multi-cloud strategy. So today, if we look at the amount of data that's processed outside of a traditional data center, it's less than 10%. But the next decade, we'll see that project and go out to public clouds and other places, more than 70%. That's a significant transition. It's because the hyperscalers are also getting into this avenue, launching new services. Finally, we hear a lot about private networks. Our view is that it's still very early because most of the initial deployments are about Wi-Fi augmentation or Wi-Fi alternative because you've got some capability that cellular provides, be it mobility or coverage. And last piece is, we talked about analytics, but one of the key things there with analytics is the fact that unless these networks are open, unless you're using common automation tools across this end-to-end network, be it the RAN, the core, you cannot mine this data, run it through the AML workflows to actually have intelligence being gleaned out of it. So as long as we can meet these 5 tenets, I think you've got a good foundation which you're building out your network. And today, globally, most of the deployments are NSA, which means that you still get an enhanced mobile broadband, and you can get probably a better experience in terms of interaction for socially, culturally, professionally, but that's not where we see the future if we talk about 5 to 10 years out. When we look at more advanced use cases beyond just cloud gaming, be it autonomous connected cars or unmanned aerial vehicles or extended reality. We talked about virtual reality, but extended reality use cases. These are still in the early stages, and we'll see the full benefits of that into beyond 5G and 6G before you fully realize it. But what these advanced use cases are going to give us is a richer interaction of humans with their surroundings. So you could have safer transportation, you get better productivity, you could have automation in all aspects of your life, a richer educational experience. During COVID time, nothing shut down for students because mostly you could do remote studying. Work mostly carried on for people who could work remotely. And that experience will change into the future as well because you have a much richer interactivity with your connected devices. And finally, a lot of focus on energy efficiency. And this is an area for, especially in Europe and other countries, a lot of focus by operators to make sure that the amount of consumption that's there in the network, because it's a significant part of the overall network consumption, is reduced. And we have now, with these advanced capability, programmability that's in the devices where it can sense the environment and turn on and off as needed. So in summary, I would say our daily interaction is definitely going to be enhanced with more connected and importantly more responsive devices, so you connect it smarter. And that would enable us to solve a lot of problems in healthcare, in our environment, in society, and hopefully with India, with the kind of scale that we have globally, that will help drive the adoption of many things. Like for example, Aadhaar, that's the largest biometric system in the world. New technologies like that, once it's adopted in India, the scale kind of proves this technology is possible. So we look forward to standalone network deployment, open RAN deployment in the Indian market to actually prove out the scale of these new technologies, which would eventually serve not just industries, but consumers as well.
That's very nice, and I think you've given a more broader perspective. And I'll come to Ron. Thank you again. Another great panelist we got from Israel. In my brief conversation which we had just a few minutes ago, I was fascinated the way you talked about the art of possible as to what all is happening and we are hearing here. Tell us what you guys are doing around it and what is it so different from what we had earlier? Because while I'm hearing all of these use cases, in fact, I get reminded of a 4G conference which I attended 5 years ago. And I heard the same thing about, the same IoT will become better and we'll have virtual experience and all that. So at some level, are we talking about more of the same? And how are you guys creating the ecosystem?
First off, guys, thank you for coming. I attending this session. At DriveNet, we came into this ring or this arena of a few incumbent players. And as Gautam was mentioning before, the ecosystem needs to grow in order to enable more opportunity for operators, for everybody who's consuming network equipment. So we went into this ring trying to kind of open it up for additional and a little bit different providers. So we're a software company and we build networks. We say that we build networks like cloud. It's not networks that serve the cloud, they are built like a cloud. So cloud has several principles of how it's being utilized, how it's being used, how it's being consumed, and it's unlike a network. So a network is very monolithic. It's very much connected to a device, and then the function that runs on top of it is, again, very local to where it's running. Very much unlike a cloud. So what we have done is we created an abstraction layer of the hardware which is running underneath. And the hardware is the same hardware like you would be using in a traditional network. It's all boiled down to the ASIC, and it's the same ASIC at the end of the day. But the way that we enable consumption of these resources is in a softwareized manner. So the type of application that we are running, and perhaps this also associates with what you were saying, Brian, the type of application can be any. What we have developed is a router, preliminarily, a router, and it's running core routers in tier 1 operators worldwide. So it's definitely there and it's definitely working, but we can enable a lot more. Once we enable different applications, when we were talking about cloud gaming, the key aspect, perhaps the number one or even the only one, which really matters, is latency. How far is the application which is running the rendering function from the user who is consuming it? And that's what dictates the user experience. So when we're talking about 5G, 5G is not faster, it's wider in its bandwidth. It doesn't make bits run faster throughout the network. Speed of light is the speed of light. We're not going to change that. So what we can do is we can pull the application closer to where the application is being consumed. And this is where edge computing is coming into play. Now, eventually there's going to be a network in between where the application is being consumed, the user, and where it's being run, the compute session. There's always going to be a network, and the closest that you can get to getting the application closer to the network is actually running it in the network itself. Now, in terms of location, it can be practically anywhere, and in the fact that we're taking physical infrastructure and we are creating an abstraction of it, means that we can consume that resource, compute or network or storage or whatnot, as resources where they are deployed. So that, in a way, pulls in the application much closer to where it's being consumed. So all of this is being enabled by creating this level of abstraction between what software application runs on top and this level of disaggregation that in 5G was kind of dictated by 3GPP definitions. We kind of boiled it down to the backbone of the network, and we're applying it on infrastructure.
That's interesting, and in fact, I was having the same thing. I was having difficulty in hearing you properly, but I think I got most of what you said. In the interest of time, I actually have about several questions, but I do want to make sure that I cover Azure. And Azure, you come from an open source ecosystem, and I'm sure you're super proud of that. I keep hearing that the best technology developments happen in relatively closed environments, and not so much on the open source in general. What's your take on it, and what's the kind of stories you are driving using open source technologies to further 5G and evolution?
Thank you. Open source has become a key component of innovation. What's happened is in the last, I would say probably 6 years or so, it's taken off multiple fold where communities coming together to develop new pieces of software, new applications in a much faster way. I'll give you my own experience. I was in a previous company and we decided to develop, something based on OpenStack, a product. At that time, we said, oh, this doesn't have elastic controller, this doesn't have that, all those features, let's try and develop that. It took us about 2 years to bring that functionality on OpenStack, which already had a baseline, and deliver that. By that time, because OpenStack was completely open source, and because the pace at which the community was moving, We realized that we spent 2 years, all this money, and guess what? There were all these features already available in the latest release of OpenStack and more. If you take a look at what's happening in Kubernetes community right now, about 68% of the code in Kubernetes has been rewritten in the last 2.5 years. About 95% of the code has been rewritten in about 4 years from Kubernetes. So what Google really open sourced Kubernetes at one point in time, which evolved from its Borg project to where it is right now, it's completely different. Now, where did that come from? It came from the community. It came not from Red Hat alone. It came from everybody. Everybody was contributing to it. So same way, in the next decade, in my opinion, technology decade, right, the amount of innovation will really come from open source. While it's absolutely true that people are still, driving their own with respect to patents and, building their own portfolios, but the space at which innovation shows up is primarily because of open source. And you can see that today in terms of not just in delivering new features or new products or new applications, but also in terms of new operational methods, new automation capabilities, which allow you to create these intelligent systems that are closed loop. I mean, all the panelists here talked about how new applications can be enabled, how they come together. Well, that doesn't happen without a cloud environment in place, without not just a private cloud, but maybe a hybrid cloud, maybe even multi-cloud, right? I think Bijoy just briefly mentioned multi-cloud capability. Now, how do you leverage that particular multi-cloud platform, build an application, deliver it? You have to have analytics associated with it, you have to have telemetry associated with it, you have to then automate it, you have to then continuously operate in what I call as autonomous infrastructure. People have talked about autonomous networks in the past. Now you're talking about completely autonomous infrastructure. So I believe that's where the innovation will come from. Open source is where the innovation will come from. I believe cloud will be the underpinning capability across all of these, in terms of use cases, in terms of technology, how it's delivered to a subscriber and to the enterprise.
Yes, I kind of now like your point that community development can also accelerate growth in many ways. Sorry for making you wait so long, Magnus. Thank you so much for joining us from Singapore. We heard just now that if something is working, don't touch. That's the kind of comment which you just heard. And in the previous panel, I also heard that 5G can be the best excuse for us to fix the whole house and do the big overhauling. Do you think that's the right way for us to approach? So either should we stay on don't touch approach, or should we say, okay, hey, this is a great time to completely renovate our entire infrastructure? What do you think about that?
Well, so thank you first for being here. I think it's very exciting to be here as 5G is now coming to the market of India with so much potential, right? I mean, we heard here on demands for new services, and I think this will be a truly inspiring thing going forward for making the networks has the right support. 5G will call for more. Just a reflection, till 2027, the number of smartphone users in India will go from 800 million to 1.2 billion, we predict, up 50%. The average usage will go from 20 gigabytes per month to 50, 2.5 times. So with that as a small piece, I think a lot of activity will be there in the networks. On top of that, and as we had exemplified here, metaverse and more demanding services coming. And they will be demanding in terms of performance and in terms of availability, always being there, service availability in a compute environment, and that includes mobile edge cloud. The flexibility of the network has to be there to deliver the right performance, and the service availability has to be there. On top of that, managing the capacity. I think over the last year we've seen great advancement with allocations of new spectrum, mid-bands and millimeter wave. It will be fundamental going forward to be able to combine all these assets together with existing assets to deliver the right experience at the right spot No longer is it peak rates, it is salvage rates that matters, to have the right performance in spots that are further away from the site. And here, combining all the layers in an intricate way will be a competitive advantage, and to do that on millisecond basis. There are lots of technologies that comes together here to be able to deliver the services that we are foreseeing, both then for consumers. We talked here before about cloud gaming, how that's being changed, and I'm sure youngsters will drive that, but also not the least for enterprises.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very insightful. I do think that I had a couple of other pointers to get to from each of you, but given the time, I'm not going to be able to come to all of you again. So maybe I'll pose a question to you, Randeep, and then others, if you have a point of view, please jump in. And the question is that we are seeing the art of possible continuously getting pushed, and there's a more and more use cases are coming up. But yet, the amount of investment does it take to create those, and the ability to monetize them on short term don't seem to be as obvious. So what's your thinking about all the investments you're going to make? What are some of these best strategies to monetize?
I think this is the elephant in the room question. How do you monetize? I think there are two ways to answer it. I think in an Indian context, monetization may not be as big challenge. I'll tell you why. Because India is a big consumption economy. Average user uses 20 GB plus volume. And if we see today, India has 600 to 700 million connected 4G devices. There are still 300 million non-4G devices. So that means India is yet to see another 300 million people who today use a phone, but they are not using data, which means you will see another demand of data to be created. Then, of course, with all these services we just talked about, the demand of existing users, need of more data, as we just heard, the volume consumption goes 2x or more, which means we will need much more data in India going forward. And what better technology than 5G to provide the data? If you see cost per GB, 5G is significantly by multiple factor cheaper than 4G to produce a GB, which means then operators are able to produce that GB cheaper and hence sell it, and hence monetization angle by demand will be there. Users will need more data. More users will come in needing data, and if you are able to produce that GB significantly cheaper than 4G, I think that's the simple answer on monetization. The newer technologies also allow the radios to be much lighter, much power efficient, hence not just the capex but the opex cost is also significantly lower. And the spectrum being a 100 megahertz carrier builds huge capacity, and hence the need of building more towers is reduced because you can build service from the same capacity. So from capacity serving, I think 5G is significantly more efficient than the previous technologies. Then comes the monetization part on the enterprise side. I think enterprise side monetization is not straightforward. I mean, our main enterprise business has been, I provide you connectivity, you pay me for the connectivity. I think 5G will have to solve business problems for that monetization to happen. In that, the big role has to be played by ecosystem. It cannot be, the earlier enterprise business used to be the enterprise and us. We used to provide them connectivity using whatever solution the customer needs, basis the bandwidth he needs, or a security solution. But here we will solve the enterprise's problem. And there the ecosystem would be needed. We will need SI players, we will need IoT players, we will need analytics players, we might need a cloud, public or private, we might need an edge play, we might need 5G technology. I think combining it together, the money we will get will not from the service, money we will get will be from the value created. I think so value creation becomes more important than just connectivity. In connectivity business, for example, you are connecting a pizza shop, right? You connect it, how many pizza he sells by online orders is left to him. So very simple example, similarly about factories. But in this case, if we're using technology to improve productivity, security, automation, I think the value creation will create value, and we will, as an ecosystem, take a pie of that value. That's how the value creation.
Brilliant. So two directions. One is bring more people onto the network and consume data like it. There's too much of people who are not included in the data revolution yet, and also you talked about the cost of serving is less and some great value addition. So you got a point there, yes?
Very quickly, I think I can share a couple of experiences based on what other people are doing around the world and how it's applicable to the Indian context. I think in India, last mile is still a challenge. And to double down on Randeep's point about providing better connectivity through which you can create value, I believe there's a giant market in India for FWA, fixed wireless access. Because still that last mile is still a challenge in terms of home broadband and home broadband usage. I think that's certainly something that 5G can provide in terms of both in the context of cost per gigabit as well as gigabit per watt context. So that's one. The second element in terms of monetization, what I have seen across the board around the world is that 5G less so consumer driven, maybe in India it's different, but in other places, much more enterprise driven. Now, in that context, specifically, applying it in manufacturing, applying it in oil and gas, applying it in public safety and security. A lot of the migration from P25 and Tetra and all of that to happened initially a little bit to the LTE, but now they're all switching over to private 5G in that particular context, particularly for public safety and security. So first responders and then military is where I'm actually seeing a lot of this type of private 5G deployments. And that's probably another place where India, I'm sure, will use this technology in a much more efficient way.
Yes.
So I'll just give some example of what happened in the US when they launched 5G. Verizon tried to charge $10 extra. T-Mobile came out like a month later saying, we're not going to charge extra. So immediately they had to drop their price. So it became not a per GB pricing. What they're trying to do was get the user onto the higher tier. So if I'm selling a $40 plan, I get them on a $50 plan, right? So the initial attempt at trying to monetize on the higher speed failed. So you had to get the user to consume as much as possible. The next attempts became more around what's a better experience to the consumer that they can provide. So simple use cases like, we talked about cloud gaming as one use case, which AT&T is very much into cloud gaming. The other use cases that I've seen are around AR, VR glasses. So say you're walking into a museum or you're going to a game. If you rent AR, VR glass at the location, you get charged for a higher experience, better latency, better throughput, just for that event. And what has to change to actually realize such use cases is also your backend. Your billing systems have to evolve to actually adapt and charge for the user. Otherwise, you're not monetizing on it. You're still stuck on the regular monthly bill. So that's on the consumer side. We see it evolve in enterprise. You covered it already. FW, I think, is a very good example. And I know Geo is trying to target that market specifically globally. If you look at FWA, millimeter wave, Verizon says after so many years, they've only got 2 million subscribers. T-Mobile is targeting around 5 million subscribers in the next 5 years. But Indian market could change the dynamics completely because the projection that I've seen that Jio is going after for FWA is around 100 million subscribers to hit, right? The kind of boxes I know, I have one of those Jio units that are used to travel everywhere. And it's not a promotion anywhere for Jio. I'm just talking about the use case in general. It can actually change mobility and how users consume this last mile access. So many use cases like that can actually change, but it also depends upon how the network is built, as I alluded to before.
No, that's a great example. I always say that, in India, if you're not doing anything at scale, it's just a hobby. So I guess most people are here trying to scale. I'm very conscious of time because I'm being pointed that we are going to the end of time. I do have just a couple of areas where I want to have very, very quick perspective. So maybe a bit of rapid fire with a couple of words responses. Would that be okay? Okay, so maybe let me start with you, Magnus, because I came to you last time. One thing which concerns you the most about the future?
One thing that concerns me,
You the most about this whole speed of digital transformation?
I think one thing concerns me in the view of we need to be very focused. We have a lot of technology to introduce in the next few years, and a lot of business development to be drawn upon that. And we must not miss focus on that.
Okay, focus. Okay, Azhar?
One thing that concerns me most is I think it's time to ditch the carrier grade concept and adopt a cloud native concept.
Interesting. Thank you.
One thing that concerns me is that because the operators could not monetize on 3G to 4G transition, and even in the 4G to 5G transition, the over-the-top players comes and monetize that, and that kind of corners the operators into not doing what they should be doing, which is opening up the networks, driving innovation in the ecosystem. I'm afraid that even this transition, the operators could lose out that value chain, the additional value that you talked about generating. So hopefully that doesn't happen in this 5G transition. We're not waiting for 6G for that to happen.
So economics coming in the way of growth. Okay, all right.
I think for me it is the pace of automation. I think to manage such complex networks with such high densities, the automation will have to keep pace with the technology being deployed.
So will the automation of managing the tech will
Managing
keep
the
pace
tech,
with
yeah.
this thing? Okay. Somebody said don't touch, right?
Yeah,
If it works, don't touch.
For me, in relation to the metaverse, is establishing a common framework to work with the service providers.
Okay.
When we mean QoE, how does it translate to a 5G KPI? And so that enables them to monetize their users in the metaverse better.
So clarity and consistency of what you're going to measure on. Perfect, thank you. Gautam?
I think we are in an excellent situation from a demand perspective. So one thing that actually concerns me is how this entire ecosystem will get together and play out. I think that's going to be a difficult one because there is going to be collaboration and conflict in that ecosystem. So we need to make those cases
How do you
work.
manage collaboration and conflict?
Open source was mentioned here before. What open source did is it's opened the industry to more newcomers. And newcomers offer more variety and more flexibility and more options. Eventually, consumers are the ones who enjoy this, the multitude of options. What I would be concerned with is the exact opposite. That would be consolidation of the industry. And it's true for subscribers such as ourselves, having the number of mobile operators shrinking to 2, 3, that's not good for the public. Same way as the number of vendors that propose a specific product shrinking, that's not good for the operators. So that consolidation level is what I would be concerned with. I can add that there is some industry bodies such as TIP, Telecom Infra Project, OCP, are working exactly on the opposite way, kind of to open it up, to standardize all the interfaces between different elements so that more players can kind of jump in and join the game.
So avoiding consolidation, beyond a point. Okay,
Correct.
Perfect. Now let me start the second question from you because you're sitting on this end. As we just heard today and even yesterday and the day before, every possible industry will get disrupted in some way or the other, hopefully for good. If you were to put your bet on with all of these new generation of technology coming, which industry has the best potential to take advantage of this new wave of digitization? One.
Well, that's a big one. I'll tell you this. Even though I came from Israel, I didn't come with any prophecy in my pocket. So really, it's anybody's game. It's anybody's game. The technology is there. It enables so many industries and so many different user experiences and improved user experiences can be then enabled, be it gaming, be it any other form of entertainment, be it the metaverse and whatever it enables. Not specifically meta, but in general, that kind of an experience, be it healthcare. And a lot of industries will evolve. Some will evolve faster, but I think it's going to have a clear impact on roughly saying everything digital, everything which is consumed in a digital manner.
You didn't listen to his question saying focus. He said that focus, right? One industry.
That's why we are sitting on the opposite ends of the panel.
Okay, Gautam.
I think that's a difficult one, but I'd pick on the education industry. It's, the reason for that, it may not be the highest in terms of revenue, but it's the biggest enabler.
Impact, okay. Education. Brian?
You know, you gave me a multiple choice question with only one answer because I work for Meta. So we believe the XR and AR experience will be a key driver because ultimately that's...
But if you were to pick one industry.
One industry.
Yeah.
One vertical industry.
Yeah.
We would go with education.
Education, okay, all right.
I think one industry which will gain a lot would be manufacturing, in my view. But I really hope what gains a lot is energy, which can move more towards green energy faster than what it is and use the tech to move there. I don't see that happening that fast, but manufacturing is poised to gain a lot.
Manufacturing, but hope for energy. Perfect, okay. This is collaboration.
I think education was covered. But in terms of monetization capability, at least what we're seeing is the mining sector.
Mining.
And port authority is just because it requires very secure connectivity, not an isolated networks. It's not connected to the remote. And 5G gives a great avenue for that in private networks. I think mining and kind of port security, whether it be the shipping ports or other kind of port security, I think is one area with a lot of monetization capability initially for 5G.
So mining ports, right? That's Joy. Thank you. Azhar?
I would have to agree with education as one, public safety and security will be the other one. I believe those areas, I think there's a lot of opportunity in the context of how technology can be used and technology can be implemented. And of course, it's monetizable.
Thank you.
So I didn't quite hear your question, but I think one driver here that will be a changer for industry is to become data-driven. With wireless connectivity, you can have more data points and draw smarter conclusions. That will impact all industries.
Perfect. That's perfect. So one very interesting contrast. I did another panel in the first half and had similar luminaries on my panel, and most of them actually converged on agriculture. And I'm interested to hear no agriculture here. We have more education and manufacturing. So what it basically tells me is saying that if I talk to 100 executives, I'm likely to get 100 use cases. That's the power of a technology which is completely boundless, has no limitations. It's all limited by our imagination. And of course, you also mentioned that this could be a concern about the monetization and economics in that sense. I've completely run out of time, but I can tell you there are such great ideas which I could pick up from this panel. So before I try and conclude, can I request a round of applause for this wonderful panel? Thank you. I will not risk to summarize everything, but there are a few takeaways I'm taking. So first is, we will see a very different disruption compared to what we have seen in 4G in this transition, as you kind of teed off very differently, saying it is something for everyone. And it's not just one industry, it's not just one use case. Even things like consoles and other things are going to get dramatically changed. That's a big thing. We heard that there's a possibility for us to change the entire ecosystem to work together and solve the problems which we today cannot see. Wonderful stories around how immersive experience will make some of those things which we today can't even imagine will become a reality, and how it will make us all a better humanity and collectively. And many, many other great examples of how businesses are taking advantage of this in the US and many other markets. So I do want to close on a very optimistic note. 5G is here, and glad to see it in India, and it's being available at scale. So thank you for people like you who are making it all happen. But to me, the real progress will be when the 5G and related technologies reach to the grassroots and are able to make the difference to every single individual, not just in India, but in Bharat. And I really want to thank you for highlighting the energy story, because we do have a planet which we are responsible for making sure that it remains as usable, if not better, for the generations to come. And I do think 5G also drives us on a better and sustainable journey. With that, thank you very much, gentlemen. It was nice talking to you. Thank you so much.